Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Sangyan Choi Morrow. I'm the Executive Director at the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. NAPAF launched our Conversations on Race and Gender series earlier this year as a platform to discuss important issues on themes in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. We also see this as an important place to uplift and recognize the diversity of our experiences as PI women. Today, it gives me great joy to welcome three rock stars who are redefining what it means to be a leader in the beauty and fashion industry. Beauty and fashion is a global trillion-dollar industry, and in our digital age, it touches most of our lives in some form every day. And while the beauty industry itself has more women leaders and CEOs compared to other major industries, the majority of business leaders are still men, let alone Asian and let alone Asian American women. As it goes without saying how groundbreaking it is to have three Asian American women trailblazers with us today to be in a conversation about what it means to lead in this industry. So I'm going to start off with introducing each of our speakers today who will be joining me on this panel and asking them to answer a fun, quick icebreaker question at the end of each introduction. So the question I'm asking everyone today is, given the holidays are rolling around the corner, what is the holiday? What is your favorite sweet or savory meal as a kid during the holidays? And first, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Vannga Nguyen, who is a creative director and talent manager. V, as she also goes by, is a partner at Rare Global, where she runs the Rare Creatives division, representing creative talent and celebrity and editorial photography and glam. She's also the founder of ADVNT Society, an award-winning creative agency and editorial studio. So first over to you, V. What is your favorite holiday meal?
Thank you for the introduction. I've been thinking about this since I first saw the question. It's really hard to say. I'm Vietnamese, so I'm gonna have to say bún bò Huế, which is, if you don't know what it is, if you do know what it is, like
If not, Google it and go try it.
it's like
That's
pho spicy cousin.
Oh, that sounds really good, especially as it's snowing out here in
Yes.
Chicago right now. I could use a bowl of that. Thanks for joining us, V. And
Thank you.
next, I'd like to introduce Kristina Rodulfo, who is an influencer and brand consultant. She's a former magazine editor and spent over a decade in print and digital media at ELLE, POPSUGAR, and InStyle. Most recently, she was a beauty director at Women's Health. And Christina, what is your favorite holiday meal?
Thanks for that intro. So I have a major sweet tooth, so my favorite holiday treat is definitely gingerbread cookies. And I enjoy making a gingerbread house every year too, with icing and gumdrops, the whole works.
That sounds great. Spicy gingerbread cookie or the super sweet gingerbread cookie person?
Super sweet,
Super
which is
sweet.
it might be a blasphemy to most ginger cookie lovers, but it's how I like it.
Sugar all the way. That sounds great. Um, Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, I want to introduce you all to Priscilla Tsai, who is the CEO and founder of Coco Kind, a conscious beauty brand rooted in sustainability and inclusivity. Coco Kind's vision is to transform the industry by empowering consumers with efficacious products and deeper transparency. And Priscilla, what is your favorite holiday meal or treat?
I feel like I have dumplings with like every occasion when I'm with my family. So I've got to go with dumplings.
That sounds great. Dumpling is a great resemblance of a lot of things that we celebrate in life. And so I think that's
Exactly.
a really great answer. So thank you so much for joining us today. And before we jump into the conversation, I just want to say that if you're watching today's panel on Facebook or YouTube, you're welcome to submit any questions you have in the chat window. and we'll try and get to them as much as we can. And before we get started, I would like to share what my favorite holiday treat is. And I was thinking about this, and I'm going to take the easy cop out because so as a Korean American, we put kimchi with everything, so it becomes Korean and American. So my Thanksgiving dinner is never complete without a bowl of kimchi to go with the turkey and the stuffing. It's the best combination. So all of y'all need to try it this Thanksgiving. It really does give a nice balance and a kick. And so that I'm sharing with you a little bit of my Korean American. Enjoy your holiday meal. So without further ado, I would like to get us started. And, I think it's a privilege for us to be able to hear from the three of you, talk about how you lead in your work and be able to, talk about it from all of who you are, including your ethnic and racial background. And I am just so excited to hear about what it means to be in the field that you are, with identity of being an Asian American woman and celebrations and the challenges that come with it. So to start us off, I would love to hear a little bit more about your personal journeys and just hearing, what led you to where you are today. Y'all are very accomplished in what you've done, and I now have discovered follow you and watch what you do, and it's just so amazing and so creative and so beautiful. Actually, it's so different my day to day, but love to hear your stories and your. I'm sure there are listeners and others out there who are wanting to venture into something similar and could use a role model or hear from you all about how you got to where you are. Who would like to kick us off?
I'm happy to jump in. I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but I grew up with a mom who's a small business owner, and so my parents both immigrated to Ohio, actually, originally from Taiwan, and they met at Ohio State University, and they ended up moving to Michigan because of my dad's job. My mom started off as a clerk at this really small business that is a distributor for nuts and tools and HVAC equipment. So super random, definitely not an industry she knew a lot about or was passionate about whatsoever. But she really liked business, and there was a lot of supply chain that involved international business. And so she started as a clerk and ended up buying the business from the owner, who is an American man, 8 years later. And since then, she still runs that company and owns it. And so I grew up going to her office and just seeing her be a really impressive entrepreneur. And so I always knew that I wanted to start a business. And then separately, I struggled a lot with my skin. I had really severe acne, a lot of sensitivities from the skincare routine that I was previously on. And I was really insecure in my skin generally. Felt really alone and felt like the beauty industry was just not for me, like not something that I could participate in, not something about, and I felt like it just every time I interacted with it, whether it was consuming products or imagery or magazines or whatever it was, that I always left feeling worse about myself. And so that, kind of combining the idea that I always wanted to start a business with this, real problem I felt like, which in the beauty industry, which is we needed to change the status quo and kind of decide that we weren't going to consume products in that way anymore. That led me to starting Coco Crane.
That's great. That's so amazing.
Amazing.
What about you, V? Do you want to go next?
Sure. I was just listening, absorbing. So I grew up Vietnamese American. My parents were actually, my dad fought on the nationalist side in the Vietnam War. They came and immigrated here to California, got married, both got re-earned their degrees, the typical immigrant story of a lot of families. And they were very academic, and they were very much like 9 to 5, had these jobs, also went back to school, had kids, raised us, lived in the Silicon Valley. So they kind of set me up to be, a good student, which I was, and kind of like, overachieve, which I did. And I was always like, my walls were plastered with like Mary-Kate and Ashley and like Teen Vogue, and I loved fashion. And I think they were like deathly scared that I would go into a creative field. God forbid. But I learned that I was really good at writing, so that was like my creative outlet. So I had a creative passion that could get me into college. So then when I eventually went to college, I started kind of like doing what they wanted, but a little bit branching off to find my freedom. So I moved from the Bay to LA, studied school, graduated, took the LSAT, took the GMAT, but like didn't move forward. I basically did what they wanted me to do, but kind of kept my foot in the door of like startups. So I found myself working in social media startup, and then marketing startup, and then in tech eventually at like a high position. By that time I was 26, and downtown in LA was just starting to change and blossom into this. I don't know if anybody listening like knows what downtown was like in 2014, but it was such a creative hub, and it was a lot of excitement around food and change. And I moved downtown, and I was like, I think I have to quit my job and figure out how to work in fashion. And I was like, there's no other way to do it. I can't just like keep thinking about it for the rest of my life and wonder what it might be like to be a creative director. So then I eventually started the ADVNT Society, which was basically me, started a website, created some mood boards, and at that time testing was very new because Instagram was pretty new. So a lot of creatives would get together, photographers, makeup artists, hairstylists, and we would shoot, and those photos would become our portfolio on our Instagram. And that's how a lot of people in the field have grown their book and grown their network. So I did branding and creative direction, fashion photo shoots and websites and logos for a long time. And then in 2019, I was like, you know what? I think that I should manage creatives. I don't know, it's a big leap, but luckily my business partner, Global, which is a big YouTube management company where my sister also worked, and she was like, if you really want to manage, like, come in and be a partner. You can build out the Rare Creatives division. And that was such an opportunity for me. And then come full circle, all the people that I ended up building trust and relationships and hustling with since 2014, when we had nothing, no book to go on, they eventually came up as well, and they were my first clients. So this day, I would say the ADVNT Society feeds straight into Rare Creatives, and my journey is not so typical. Took some leaps of faith, but it's kind of like one of those things where you can't stop thinking about it. Life would be so different if you don't go for it. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now. How I got to where I'm at right now. The perfect intersection.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in now with my story and my background. So I grew up in Queens in New York, and New York City obviously is a very diverse city, and Queens is an extremely, probably one of the most diverse counties in the world, I think. So every other block had a different culture and community that was almost like mini neighborhoods of different cultures. So I never grew up feeling otherness. I always felt like I was surrounded by a very strong Asian community, a very strong Filipino American community, because I'm Filipino myself. My parents immigrated from the Philippines. My mom is a nurse, and she moved here in the late 80s, and then my dad and my brothers came over too. I grew up in an environment that was very much all about realizing the American dream. You know, making this the traditional idea of having a home, having a stable job. My siblings and I, we would talk about what we called the meal plan and how we all felt like we had to be on the meal plan. And it's an acronym for medicine, engineering, accounting, or law. So we all thought that we had to join at one of those one of those industries, and of course none of us ended up in any of those industries because you put a bunch of kids in New York City and you're going to grow up with a lot of creative, ambitious people. And I honestly really owe it to my brother, my older brother Carl, for opening up my idea of what was possible for me, because he actually went and worked in media as well, and he started out in television, and he was a producer at NBC for a while, and he's 6 years older than me, so getting to see him in those spaces really kind of made it possible for me to think, okay, well, I could work in the media industry too. And as somebody who loved being glam and dressing up, and I was the one who would do everyone's makeup at prom and hair at prom, I knew that I wanted to work in magazines, and I knew I wanted to be working in fashion and in beauty. And so having a very clear goal from a young age, I worked, I went to NYU, I worked my way through college while interning at all of the magazines, like Harper's Bazaar, InStyle, ELLE, like all of those big magazines that I subscribed to growing up. And I really tried to make my way because I felt a very strong drive to make the industry more inclusive. If you are, on the side that is telling stories, you really have like a huge impact on how other people, other readers or consumers feel about themselves. So any opportunity that I had to uplift, an API entrepreneur or an API founded brand or to an API model, hairstylist, makeup artist, any chance I could uplift somebody from our community, I would. And if, that is what really motivated me to continue on that, what is very competitive path. Working in magazines. And then now, I went freelance at the beginning of June, and now I'm in the influencer space, which is also very much in need of more diversity. So I just feel like, thinking about what brands I work with, what people I decide to partner with, I think that just the mere presence of a face that looks like mine in this space is, I think, an improvement from what it was like when I was coming up, which was there was literally nobody for me. I had no mentor who looked like me. I had no one to really kind of bring me up. So being that connection for somebody else is what motivated me to keep going.
Thank you. No, that all of you have such different, like thematically so inspiring stories. I think it, just listening to, I'm so glad like we're having a conversation because who knows, who's out there wondering to quit their job and move downtown LA and take, right? Like, I mean, I just think so much of what you've done is so brave. And I think often as immigrants ourselves, we feel to conform and like do the safe, successful thing. And what I'm hearing and what I'm so inspired by from what all of you are saying is that you had support and you also really believed in what you were doing and this is what you wanted to set out to do. And like I think trail really the right word to describe what you all have to do. So it's so amazing. And some of you've touched on this already, but I would love to hear a little bit more about, how your work intersects with your family and cultural experience. And you sort of mentioned doing what they wanted for a while. And I actually recently read I don't know if you read this article about this woman in Australia who's like became a millionaire, like selling like her Chinese immigrant parents didn't know about it. Would literally like sit on the bus next to her mom pretending like she was going to her accounting job, like because she couldn't tell them, right, that she and like invested into this business that she just created. And stories like that I feel like so so familiar to so many of us because of what we think is the right thing to do. And so I more from each of you, I mean all of you mentioned family, mom, brother and parents, but a little bit more about what have family support or what it took to get there.
I'll just speak really quickly on it. I think that my path is a path of was a lot of resistance, to be honest, because it wasn't like I didn't have the skills to maybe just dig in. And like I was always a good student and I respect academics. I respect anybody who goes into the field of law or God forbid economics, which I was tried my hardest and could not get accounting right ever, which was shocking to me. But I think it's one of those things where if you're creative, one day you wake up and you wonder what's more important, your ability to do what you're supposed to do or your ability to be yourself. And I think it's a very deep thought for anybody who goes on the journey of, do I continue to do this thing that will make everybody else happy or do I take a leap? And at some point, you either believe in yourself delusionally, which helps sometimes, and you back it up with work, or you become desperate that you cannot live a different type of life and lie to yourself. Or honestly, you have a midlife crisis that's somewhere down the line and you switch over. But I think I knew in my heart that my parents, I would disobey and they would be upset, which they were, and I did. And we had, some strenuous things happen over the course of whatever, but they were always there. I always knew that. If I ever moved home and gave up, they would support me. And I have to say that that will always be true. But I couldn't move home and give up, right? But I also knew that if I was able to prove to them, proof of concept, that I had a goal, a path, a plan, and eventually was able to create a stable life for myself, they would only be happy. You know, they just want you to take the easy route because they worked so hard to give you something easier than what they had. And look at you, now you want to go and build up some grit and character. It's beyond their thought process. So I would say, like, my parents did everything right, everything they knew that they were supposed to do, and I just picked a path that required me to choose what I thought was right. So that's my experience. And now we're good. Now we've grown up and, you know, we've mended all those things, but yeah, it's definitely difficult while you're in it, I think, sometimes.
I think a lot of it for me was you just had to have a conversation, you know, you just needed to understand and bridge the gap between understanding what they think is a creative job, which is, you know, you have no money ever and you know, I think that there's just not, they didn't grow up with that kind of exposure to, or opportunities really to pursue a creative field, even if they had wanted to. So I think that just, you know, from a young age, teenage years, early 20s, I would continually have these conversations with them to let them know these are my plans, this is my vision. But at the end of the day, you know, you grow up, you're your own person, you're an adult, and you don't have to prove anything to anybody else but yourself. I think that that's something that I have really realized because a lot of times, you know, kids of immigrants, you grow up with this idea of sacrifice hanging over your head. Like, look how much your parents sacrificed for you. You really owe it to them to have the stable job or to be perfect or, you know, all these kinds of ideas. But you really have to take ownership of your life and to think to yourself, okay, even if there are these expectations from my community, from my parents, from my family or anything, you have to think to yourself, what is the kind of impact that I can make in my lane, you know, because my parents, they chose more traditional route. They decided to have these long careers in, you know, in medicine, for example. And I'm choosing a less traditional route, but no less of, you know, a dream to continue to, you know, be impactful in my way. So I think that it's just about keeping your vision, you know, and making sure that you follow your gut feeling if you know that that's the way that you want to go, that to follow it.
Yeah, I think it is like such a commonality with Asian people in our generation, from with parents who immigrated here. And for me, like I was always like this stereotypical, like good at math and good at, you know, I went to business school, I studied finance accounting, I started my career at JP Morgan, and did the banking thing. And I remember I got an internship at Teen Vogue when I was really interested in fashion, when I was a sophomore in college, and I also got an internship at Lehman Brothers, which is funny because they went away this summer, and I basically my parents were like, Lehman Brothers, that's amazing, like go work there. And they were like so proud that I got this internship at Lehman Brothers, so I did that. And then they like went away literally a month later. But like it was like very much discouraged for me to pursue that path of not like non-finance. But I get it, you know, like they didn't have the opportunities that we did. And when they came here, it was so much about survival and economic equity, you know, and that's something that like we as a, you know, we're still fighting for as a community. But I get that in their minds, like the reason why they would have come here is to like support us with the best education possible and push us to that, and to try to get as much economic equity. I definitely think that like pressure is real and it creates a lot of, it does create a lot of consequences, but like Christina says, that just means that you have to, you know, you really just have to take things into your own hands too. And so ultimately, I did my finance years for 4 years, and then I was like, you know what, I want to start my own business, and it's not going to be in finance. So at the end of the day, the fate is in your own hands, and there's so much that we can take that's positive from a lot of that pressure, and then you have to carve out like whatever your own path is.
Thank you for that. It's yeah, this resonates for so many people. Question: I would love to hear a little bit. Survive, like, you know, I feel like y'all are kind of you've gone through the hard part, like be like you're good with like, but how do you survive those in between years where you're like, I cannot fail because I cannot move into my parents' basement and maintain the relationship with folks who are not super excited about work. I've heard friends say that they tell them that they money, that like, why did I send you to this expensive, like, if you were gonna go do this, like, if you're gonna quit and do this, did you even, why do we pay so much money for expensive sort of this mentality of like, oh, a good return on our investment, but also like this mindset of like, I often hear, I think, in parents like, oh, like that's like risks, like we never had to work hard. So how do you like navigate those things, and how do you like, what are some tips for people you really
Oh,
balance like
good
respect and loving your parents and like holding true to what you want to, you know, in what you've set out to do?
I I would love to say that I handled it all gracefully, but it's just not true, you know? You're like, you go through waves. Like at first you're like, I have to do this. Then you're like mildly resentful. And then you're like, why am I behaving this way? And then you like get to a point where you're like, they just, that's how they know how to love you. At some point you get out of it and you're like, they love me. And that's the most important thing. Like to have a relationship with my parents has become so important to me. This is my personal journey. I've come a long way to getting there. And most of that time, they just didn't understand why I was probably behaving the way that I was. But some of those statements that you just dropped, very casually they say, and in this day and age, I will say that with the rise of more access to mental health, a lot more AAPI talking about Asian mental health, believing it's a real thing, that this is not a normal way to be put under pressure like cooker. Like I would remember when I was in college where I would tell my friends who grew up differently, they're like, I can't believe your parents would say that to you. And I was like, that's the tip of the iceberg, girl. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, it gets way deeper than that. But I kind of just reframed it in a way where this is just what they do. And at the end of the day, if the result is I can prove that I can do it to myself and prove that I can make it on my own and be happy, they will turn a corner. You just have to fake it till you make it a little bit sometimes. Because I wasn't the type of person that estranged myself. Like I still came home and I still built these relationships. You faked it till you made it on the hustle side of the job, trying to get to where you wanted to be. So then you fake it till you make it on your parents' side. And then eventually, like everyone, you do a little therapy, you grow up a little bit, and then you really try to find your way back. And I think one of the big lessons that I learned in recent years is no matter where I'm at in my life, I can create more success and more business and more this. But that relationship, if I can't figure out how to mend it and speak openly to my parents and show them who I really am and see them for who they really are, like it would be such a waste to think this is a success. And I don't care about that, And I think that for Asian American, family dynamics is a huge part of who we are. And we can't just draw a boundary. We can't just, you stay on your side, like it will never be that way. That's not how Asian families work, So I would say, honestly, having more conversations with people like yourselves, like people who work in the industry and have been through these things and are API, I think it's really helpful. At least that has been for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, isn't this the reason why we're all in therapy? Like,
It is. It's the reason why I'm in therapy.
yeah. But look, I think it's like wanting the validation of your parents is an extremely natural thing. Like, parents are your first religion. And yeah, it's something that you are geared towards. And I think that, I mean, I did move home when I quit my job at JP Morgan. Like, my parents were like, yeah, like you can move home, and like, cause yeah, they're like, you have to save money for your business. So I moved home, and I was like at their home on Friday night, single, and watching like Real Housewives, and they were like, is this what you're supposed to be doing? Like, is this what you're doing? Do you quit your like 6-figure job for this? And there was some pressure, and I think now they're very proud of me, but it is one of those things where there's always pressure. And not only that, even if after you're deemed successful, it's kind of like, yeah, well, like you're the second generation, so of course you had so much more to work with. So that is expected. And so you don't, it's not like you're getting these like warm and fuzzy feelings. Like my husband is Hispanic, his parents are, they're Argentine. And I mean, he like does one thing and it's like the whole world is, he's like he's like the president of the United States status importance, you know, like he just gets so much praise. And I'm like, I'm sitting there like, you know, like it's really different. I think that's just like how it is. And to Vanya's point, it's like talking to other people in the community. All, you know, a lot of my friends are Asian, and it's just like if you know, you know, and you can really talk to people about it.
I think that for me, I think just letting them in on like to be a part of my career is also a way that I have been able to really, let them understand. Like, for example, I was, as a beauty editor, you get invited to trips around the world, you get invited to really fun events and things. Like, any chance I could bring my mom, I would. So I took her one time. I was invited on this, like, all expenses paid trip to Aruba for work, and my mom was my plus one. And she was like, "This is work." I said, "Yes. You can order whatever you want from the bar, go enjoy the beach, relax. This is part of my job." And she
Right.
was just like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And to this day, she still talks about that trip from Aruba. And I'm just like, so any chance I have to like let them in on on like to be a part of my success and also to share it with them, and I because this is how she understands what this success means, through a fancy trip.
No, this is so helpful. I mean, I think what's kind of surfacing for actually, like we we have these expectations too, right? That like, oh, I wish you like my other friends' parents would say these things, but they are who they are, who we are, and I think what you all have just demonstrated is you've put in the effort to bridge that, understand, and that's amazing. And I think all of us are trying to do that to some degree, but I think the way you all have talked about it is it's like, oh, that's a really good point. It's a two-way street. Like I should also be putting in the effort as much as I expect my parents to put in the effort. I love that we're talking about mental health and getting mental health support openly. I agree. It needs to be talked about even more, but finding that validation and affirmation, within works within your support groups, that's all really helpful for folks who are feeling pretty isolated. He really zeroed in and focused on like, how do I get this out of my parent? Really shown that like it can be in various ways from other folks. Story about your partner is hilarious. Like polar opposite.
They're opposites. It's insane.
That's really funny. That's really funny. So the next theme that I want us to discuss a little bit is about being Asian American women in this space, but specifically in beauty and fashion. And I think all of our viewers and listeners and you all have also experienced just sort of the ways we even within our own have internalized racism and standards of as beauty. Like in Korea, like a lot of people getting eye surgeries to make their eyes bigger and use skin whitening products and just really trying to live up to uh, a very way of looking at beauty, which is fairness is skin is much more beautiful than any other. And the ways that we see it, and I heard beauty is it's kind of expected that it's accessible for certain types or certain types of people. And so I'd love to hear about like how has the space been for you as an what are the challenges have changed over the years, and what are areas that still need more in terms of really being able to bring your whole self and being valued for who you are, and the beauty that you external standards of what they expect. I know I said a lot, so go ahead, Pete.
Um, yeah, I can dig in or take a stab at it. But for me, I grew up in a really white community. I was like the only Asian person in my high school, or in my grade in high school, um, and and so I just grew up with this idea that like I had to. I always was like trying to be more Western, and it would be like things like tanning or wearing color contacts or whatever it was. Like I don't know, I like almost wanted to just like look more white. And for me, like that was like a really impactful thing over the years, where I realized like in my kind of like mid to late 20s of like, wait, why am I doing this? And like why am I looking around, and why am I like happy Asian person in this room? Like I never had really valued like this part of my identity that I had just like kind of blocked away, and especially as it related to like the beauty standards, I kind of was like doing everything I could to be less Asian or to look less Asian. Um, which is like when you say that out loud, I mean that's so sad, like that's what I had seen and absorbed from my world, that I was like a young woman deciding that that's what I wanted. And so I think it's just been like a really big awakening for me over the past like whatever 5 to 7 years of just like owning this beauty and being Asian and what that means, and not feeling like I have to conform to anything. And I think like the industry is definitely made a lot of improvements when it comes to inclusivity generally, but I think the biggest thing is just like not treating Asians like we're all like the same, or like, oh, we got like the one Asian model, check. And then I think that's the way that a lot of minorities feel, honestly, when it comes to like beauty industry and marketing. It's like we're not just a check in the box for your marketing campaign. We want to be spoken to, and we want to feel represented. So that is something that I feel like it's still evolving, very much so. But it has, for me, the beauty to me has really started with like understanding my own, like actually even before like criticizing like anything else in the industry, it's like starting with my own, like what does that mean to me? And that's where I've done the most amount of work, actually.
Um, that was amazing to hear. So I mean, while you were talking, I was like, man, it goes way back. I was just gonna talk about industry wise, but I think you brought up a point, like your relationship like starts so early, depending on where you grew up. I grew up in Santa Clara, which I always made a joke that nobody there knew that they weren't a certain skin color, because we all listened to hip hop music, and we went to public school, and we dressed like, there was a different clique for everything that you wanted. There's like the rockers, the skaters, the break dancers. There was like so much diversity at my school, actually. That was only like 1,500 kids, high school. And then when I got to college, UCLA, there was a huge Asian population at UCLA, but I was more in the Greek system. So that population was more Caucasian. And there is a moment where you're like, I'm the token Asian friend. I loved it. Honestly, I was like, tight, for me. But it was a commodification of myself, which in my mind, it was branding. You know what I mean? Like, suffice it to say. And the thing is, I never maybe thought about beauty in that way. I never like thought to change myself to look more white or to be more European. That didn't cross my that thought didn't cross my head. But a race commodification thing that I probably like sat somewhere in the back of my mind. And it was also a gender thing as well. You're competing with men, you're competing with, in the academia space, like, I don't know, it was complicated. And it wasn't until I went into creative field and literally moved, like I said, to downtown, there was people I never met before, like of every walk of life. A lot of my clients are gay, LGBTQIA plus. They opened my eyes to very different types of bodies and people and things and lifestyle. And I had relationships with people not of my race, and it really, really created a world of inclusivity that was organic for me. And because I had to network in order to create my position in branding and in working with these types of creatives, I was completely immersed in the type of fashion and beauty that I think is now more what people are striving towards, like true inclusivity. And I also think that when it comes to business, because I am Asian American, a woman of color, I never even actually thought of it, about it like that until very, very recently. AAPI movement, like, not to say that it hasn't always been, but with what happened in this past year, there was definitely a turning point, a catalyst, a pivot, stepping in front of the AAPI movement and actually being like, we're Asian American women and we're representing ourselves. Like, it was like, I think we'll talk about this later, but it was a huge step even for myself, to help co-found the Asian Women Alliance donation campaign with my co-founder, Ashley, who's also my business partner. We're like, aren't we the Asian American women we're supposed to be talking about? Like, why are we afraid to raise money for our own community? And it was almost like, because when it comes to talking about us, about being Asian and American, and in the spaces that we don't always create the space for ourselves. We don't always hold the space for ourselves. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah,
but
no, this is really
it's dynamic and it's changing,
insightful.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I mentioned, I grew up in a really diverse neighborhood that had a lot of, Asian representation, so I never felt like I was other until I started working in the industry and in the media and publishing industry, where I realized that I was pretty much always the only Asian person there, only Asian woman there, usually the only woman of color, period, there. And that was really jarring to me. It's kind of wild to think that, like, in a way I'm really grateful that I grew up in a community where I felt so supported and like I saw other people like myself. But going out into the industry that I wanted to be working in and seeing just how little of myself I saw in these big rooms where all these big decisions were being made, I felt really motivated to at first kind of shed any sort of culture that I had. Like, I didn't talk about being Filipino. I didn't, I tried not to bring up anything that would make me seem different or stand out, or like, I basically tried to, like, be invisible in a way and tried to mold myself in so that I could fit in as best as I could, because I thought that that was the only way to succeed, is if you were, palatable to a white audience. And so as I gained more confidence, and became a lot more passionate about representation and inclusivity, I started realizing, okay, the best thing that I could possibly do is be really loud and proud about my culture. And so over the last, throughout my 20s now, I've been like thinking, as I've gotten older, I'm going to be sharing my culture as much as I can. I'm going to be, connecting with other people who are from the same culture as me, and amplifying their work, celebrating them, and bringing it into my work as much as I can too. And honestly, this has been really great because it's kind of how a lot of people have discovered me, is because I have been very vocal and talking a lot about my pride in my culture, and being part of the API community. So I think in a way that change in my attitude from being like, oh, I don't want to have any culture, like, don't ask me about anything, like, I'm just gonna be over here in the corner, like, trying to fit in, to being like, I'm Filipino and proud and like part of the API community, and we're the best and this is great. Like, like, I think that it's totally shifted, and I'm really happy that I made that change, because I think that it's things like this that help move the industry forward. Having people be more proud of their culture.
Yeah, I hear a theme of like owning it and like being confident in who you are, and what you want folks to see you for, or the inclusiveness that you want to chart out for, the areas of work that you're involved in. And I think that that really goes to that resonates with many of us in different fields, right? This idea that Asian American women are supposed to be like the quiet, docile ones without any opinion. Like, I think we've all just about had it, right? Like, to the point we're gonna get to next. I think our this year has been in many ways a watershed moment. We, especially following the Atlanta spa shootings in Atlanta. And, it still strikes me so it just strikes me so much, even to this day, that like people can talk about the Atlanta spa shooting and so like casually as a part of COVID related violence, when I know it really had a different impact, especially for Asian American Pacific Islander women, right? Because of what it represents, this intersection of race and gender discrimination that we've experienced in this country. So I would love to hear a little bit from each of you. It's been 8 months since the Atlanta spa shooting, and how has that affected you? And what were you feeling during the time immediately following the killings? And um, and what's your message to our community of Asian American Pacific Islander women as you reflect about your own responses and reactions in March?
I think for me, it's like it was just this, period of just a lot of reflection and processing of emotions that I never really had even understood that I had about being an AAPI woman, about being that having some the racism and specifically as a woman, some of the things that we just like, I think, being in New York and like being catcalled or being, I don't know, in dating, being like these like kind of stereotypes that are placed on you as a woman that I just kind of never like, I never even allowed myself to feel bad about it. Like I just kind of, I don't know, it's just, that moment to me just brought up so many emotions and so many like, just had to really process everything that I had gone through in my life, and that was for the first time. So it was pretty incredible, like just how much I had to think about. Um, the other thing that I think that came out of that to me is like, I think especially one of the things I'm really thinking about these days is like, I feel like a lot of API women like me, like we are raised competitive, and especially with other AAPI women, there's like that saying that like Asian people don't get in fights with anybody else besides from other Asian people. And like I don't know, it's just like something that I've been thinking a lot about. Like there was so much like I was brought up with like so much like competitive fire, like you have to be the best, but that also prevented me from like really like bonding with like my AAPI sisters in this community and like just like really joining forces. And so that completely changed after the Atlanta spa shootings too, where it was kind of like, why are we all in our individual islands? Like we're all killing it, yeah, but like imagine what would happen if we like bonded together. Like think about that network effect. Think about like, we don't have to be competitive. Like we collectively should like really become this insane force and movement in this country that like that's this is our time to like take that space, and we have to do that together. So kind of letting go of this like nurtured competitiveness and being like that is like no longer serving us, and we need to really just like bond together here.
Thank you.
I think the first thing that I felt after it had happened, the attacks happened, was definitely rage, like immense rage, sadness. I remember deciding to film a video on Instagram where I'm just like talking to camera very candidly about how I feel, and I was terrified to share that, but I felt like it was it was important for me to do because I was so sick of just being like perfect. Like I was sick of being this, just like always handling everything, being okay, like kind of compartmentalizing everything, because that's kind of how I was brought up, to just like not cause a ruckus, and I remember vividly that day that I actually had a panel to speak on for work when I was still at my magazine job, and I could not, I was like, I couldn't stop crying, and I just knew that there was no possible way that I was going to be talking about, I don't know, fragrance industry trends while there was this crazy attack, and to pretend like everything is okay. And so I actually, something that I never would have done a few years ago because I would be too scared to, is like I just said that I couldn't do it. I decided to take a day off work that day. Um, and just like decided to really process my emotions as opposed to just working and doing, treating it like any other day. And I feel like that was a big turning point for me because, culturally, as Priscilla was talking about, we're taught to just kind of just like work really hard and be really competitive and don't have any sort of weakness, you know?
Mhm.
And I think that it was a big moment for me to just be like, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share it with my community and take from it what you will. I hope that it inspires more awareness for what's happening in this community, because I think the number one most frustrating thing for me was just like the lack of attention and care that was being given to the community, which thankfully has started to change, but obviously there's a long way to go.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, when you guys were talking about it, I was like putting myself back there, and it was such a surreal time because as it was happening, I was like you guys, I was like general shock, and then just like this like latent heaviness, and I'm like, am I this sad? Like, and it really was because I realized like maybe as a woman in the industry or how I've treated my Asianness, I've always thought about it not as an empowered because I think about myself. I used to think about more like women first. I was more concerned about being a woman and succeeding. And in spite of being Asian, not like I'm powered by being Asian. That's just maybe a mode I was on. I didn't even realize it was like that. And then as I started to think about the pandemic, things that were happening, the minute, the Black Lives Matter movement was going on, like we wanted to jump in and help. We wanted to be able to be supportive. And that was honestly like this. We knew we had to, right? And yet when this thing happened, nobody knew what to say. I called my friends, like everybody was shocked, sad, honestly depressed. People like were very strange for like a while, and we're like, what do we even say about it? Like, what do I say? Do I say that I'm sad and we need help? God, like I've never even said that before. Does the community all say that together? We're sad and we need help. Do we all say there's a void in our community of looking even at ourselves in the mirror and being like, we're sad, we need help? And it wasn't until Daniel Day Kim went on Rihanna's Instagram where he said, as a community, we have a lot of work to do in stepping up in front of this movement and even owning the fact that something's happening and we need some help and we need to help each other. And I just thought that was crazy. That was a crazy position to be in, to not be able to ask for the help or the alliance or the consideration that we're so quick to give to our businesses and our jobs and proving that we're dope and we can succeed. And it's a competitiveness that's not so compassionate to ourselves, to be honest, and our history that is so deep. And a lot of people didn't, like myself, didn't even know about the AAPI initiatives and efforts in the community that you guys have been doing a long time, you know what I mean? Becoming more exposed to the advocacy work that we didn't even know about. So I say that to say, being in digital media and even having a women's foundation and working with YouTubers who in our industry, there's a lot of Asian YouTubers in fashion and beauty, there is a platform. So when Ashley, my business partner, was like, why don't we try to raise money? We know how to do that for our foundation. We know how to do that for other things. Why don't we try to raise it for AAPI organizations? And there was honestly a little bit of hesitation because people were like, do we do it? And I'm like, but we're Asian American women. Who else would be doing it? You know? And I had to be like, what am I talking about? All of my skill sets and all of my intersection lead to this thing to be able to raise a little bit of money to help my community. And that was the most that we knew how to do because we leave the advocacy work to the advocates. You know, we respect the space of what it is, but it was a huge reckoning, I would say, for the Asian community and for myself.
Thank you. Um, I think it was a moment for many folks to, in some ways it's we've even as we are living our lives in the best selves, like we have internalized like the immigrant survival mentality, which is not to put attention on ourselves, not to talk about ourselves, not to talk about what we need. And like I can't even imagine saying I need help, right? Like so many of us are in that space. And I think this year really did bring that to surface where it's like collectively we need to talk more about the realities of our communities and what's happening. And I realized that, I talked to over 200 reporters within like a span of 4 days. And they like most of them didn't even know like why Asian American women were responding the way we were, right? They were like, they had no idea that we have these hypersexualized experiences on the street because of the way we look. Like, people were like flabbergasted. I'm like, do we live in the same country? Like, how do you not know this? And I realize it's because we don't talk about it, right? Like, and like, I literally have friends reach out to me. I'm like, how come you've never told me these things happened to you? And I was like, oh yeah, like I talked to my sister about it. I talked to other Asian women about it, but I don't like, this is not something I talk about very publicly, right? So I do think that it being personal, I mean, it's like it wasn't us and it was us, right? And how do we move forward, making sure that we continue to in some ways be more vulnerable than we have been, right? So that future generations don't have to deal with what we're dealing. I don't want my daughter to deal with what I deal with, right? Like, how do we create a world so that the next generation of Asian American Pacific Islander women don't have to deal with some of the things that we've had to deal with because systematically and we've talked about it. So, so much for your reflections on that. And I know you just want to realize that, we NAPOF was a recipient of some of that fund, and Ashley helped raise, and Priscilla's company also donated funds to us. And, I just am so appreciative of y'all like seeing our work and partnering with us and, really investing in our own community. And so I want to thank you for that and look forward to future partnerships and how we can continue to tell our stories. And as we wrap up here, I wanted to just very quickly say, ask, like, we could just do like one sentence, go arounds, like, what would be, if you met your 10-year-old self today, what advice or message would you give her knowing what you know today?
I can go. So I wish I could tell myself to, never dim your spark for anyone and to never worry about being too much for people because it's something, I don't know if you guys are into astrology, but I'm a Leo. I'm very much out there. And, I think that a lot of times I have held myself back because I was afraid of being too much for people, even from a young age. And I think that, if I could tell her one thing, I would say if you feel like if you're afraid of being too much for people and if they think that about you, then they're not for you. And it's okay to not be for everybody.
I love that.
Um, I would, I mean, too much to say, but I would say trust your gut and the authenticity of who you are. That'll get you through no matter what. And then I would add a caveat: try not to be an a-hole. Like, you're not, because once you fake it till you make it, you're like, I'm the best, And then then that's like how you have to behave sometimes. But sometimes you have to say sorry here and there. I would say find a little grace.
I love it. Love it.
I think for me, it would just be this feeling like you are enough. I think that's still something that I have to remind myself like regularly, every day, every minute. And especially when I was a young girl, whether it was about appearance or, success or whatever I was trying to do. I'm never ever quite feeling like that, so that having that security in my own identity. So that's what I would go with.
That's that's so great. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your experiences and your stories. This was such an amazing hour. I can't believe it's over already, and I know that our community is, so much wiser for having heard your stories and your journeys today. Our everyone for tuning in today, especially our NEPHOF members for joining our conversation. And to make sure that you get invited to our next conversation series, please sign up at naphof.org. And we will see you all soon. And have a lovely afternoon and evening, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much. Bye,
everyone.
everyone.